About 10 days have passed since working-level denuclearization talks between North Korea and the U.S. ended without much progress. Pyongyang is once again upping its rhetoric against Seoul and Washington, demanding the suspension of the two allies' joint military drills, while also threatening to resume intercontinental ballistic missile tests. Meanwhile, U.S. President Trump, who faces a pile of diplomatic issues that need to be resolved ahead of next year's presidential election, remains relatively silent on the North Korea issue. Today, we go in-depth on the latest stance of Pyongyang and Washington on denuclearization with Dr. Myong-hyun of the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. It's always a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So North Korea, through its propaganda outlets, criticized joint drills conducted by South Korea and the U.S. Marines, while also slamming the defense talks held between the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the two allies earlier this month. How do you see North Korea's behavior following the no-deal Stockholm talks?
Well, this is a continuation of the narrative that North Korea has put forward since the collapse of the talks in Stockholm. We have to understand that North Korea, as well as the United States, are actually engaged in this blame-shifting game, so to speak. So each side has developed a narrative to explain the actions or like a lack of action so far. So North Korea essentially is using all these statements to characterize the American position as being one that's actually maintaining a hostile attitude towards North Korea, and it's not willing to go the extra step to give North Korea the security assurances or types of security assurances that it's seeking in order for North Korea to engage in meaningful denuclearization. So on the other hand, the United States also is engaged in some sort of spinning kind of operation here. United States, statements coming from the Secretary of State Pompeo, as well as the U.S. ambassador to South Korea, they're all actually talking about North Korea not being serious or like a faithful to the promises made before. So both sides are engaged in this in diplomacy, so to speak. They're trying to shift the blame for the failure of the working-level talks in Stockholm. So
the U.S. did make some fresh offers, but that wasn't enough for North Korea.
Exactly. So it transpired in the last couple of days that the United States, as asked by North Korea, came to Stockholm armed with so-called a new approach, or like fresh ideas. And in more detailed way, I mean, apparently United States is willing to lift some of the sanctions, at least on a temporary basis, such as lifting the ban on the export of coal and as well as import of oil by North Korea. So in order to give some, breathing room to the North Korean economy that's suffering under heavy sanctions, in exchange for North Korea to probably shut down the Yangbyun nuclear complex. So North Korea has essentially said that that's not enough, and then we have to understand that despite the very stringent rhetoric coming from both sides, they are engaged in this truly meaningful diplomatic game here. North Korea was trying to do right now is to get the maximum price possible for giving up Yangbyun, which is a well-known complex that some experts believe it's outdated and no longer useful for North Korea's nuclear program. And the United States obviously is sitting on, across the aisle, trying to extract the maximum concession from North Korea and then give up as little as possible in terms of the leverage that they have, which are the sanctions. So I think the two are engaging very heated transactions, so to speak.
So I guess we can say that the tug of war continues between North Korea and the U.S. after the Stockholm talks. U.S. President Trump has a lot of major issues at hand other than North Korea, including the U.S.-China trade deal, an impeachment inquiry at home, as well as Turkey's continuing offensive against the Kurds in Syria. Do you think these impending issues are what's keeping Mr. Trump relatively silent about North Korea issue?
Clearly, I think President Trump is distracted. All the foreign policy issues that you just mentioned, it's a very typical menu of things that U.S. presidents have on their platter every day. But I think President Trump is facing a unique challenge domestically in the form of the impeachment inquiry. I think most of his attention is devoted to this issue. I mean, I think we know from the media reports that Trump is taking all these impeachment proceedings by the U.S. Congress very seriously. And I think that's distracting him from the ongoing negotiation with North Korea. And I think there's another factor here, which is probably, it's something that President Trump has emphasized over and over, which is his belief that the time is on the American side rather than North Korea side. Trump believes that the sanctions are having a strong bite and also having a lot of influence, negative influence on the North Korean economy, causing a lot of pain to both the North Korean state and its people. So probably he believes that the lack of action on the part of the United States is not such a bad thing. I mean, in a way, coming to an agreement, a harried agreement with North Korea, probably is not the most recommendable outcome from his point of view. So that's something that probably puts the pressure on North Korea to speed things up.
Well, we all know that Mr. Trump had always emphasized that he is in no rush.
Exactly.
Trump is facing harsh criticism that he has abandoned the Kurdish fighters who helped the U.S. in its fight against the ISIS by withdrawing U.S. troops from northern Syria. And this, according to many reports, has got many of Washington's allies on edge. How do you think Korea is observing this?
So what's happening in Syria with the Kurds and what's happening in South Korea is, I mean, seemingly there are two different things, but then they have the unique, the same common cause, which is President Trump's desire to radically transform the U.S. foreign policy structure in terms of alliances, especially. But then we have to understand that President Trump's conception of changing the alliance structure or security architecture for the United States manifests themselves in different ways in different parts of the region. For instance, in the Middle East, President Trump's primary objective is to lessen the U.S. exposure to the problems that are happening in that region. So he wants to reduce the number of troops that are posted there, essentially reduce the expenditure that the U.S. has incurred in that region, the Middle East, since 9/11 back in 2001. On the other hand, when it comes to South Korea, along with the traditional U.S. allies such as Japan, European, NATO, and then other countries, what President Trump is trying to do here is not to withdraw from from this region, so get rid of the alliance that the U.S. has already. It's more about making the allies pay more, essentially share more of the burden. So what President Trump is going to do here, I mean, if there's a common pattern here with Middle Eastern here, it's not that President Trump is going to dismantle the alliance with South Korea. It's going to be the United States trying to exact more price or more of a burden sharing from South Korea in this time. So what she's going to do is probably to ask South Korea to pay way more for the cost of basing U.S. troops in this country.
So we wouldn't have to be concerned too much about the possible withdrawal of U.S. troops from the Korean Peninsula, but we may have to think about coming up with a lot of money to pay more.
Exactly. Of course, adjustment in the case of South Korea or the Korean Peninsula, and then a totally different case in the case of Middle East.
While criticism over the U.S. withdrawal of troops from Syria continues, Washington's top diplomat, as well as Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, has once again stressed the importance of cooperation among allies in denuclearizing North Korea. Implications?
Well, we know that North Korea likes to play by divide and conquer, so to speak. North Korea understands that the different players in the region have a different level of interest in the North Korea's denuclearization. For instance, South Korea and the United States would like to see a complete denuclearization in North Korea, whereas China and then Russia seem to be less in a hurry to see that outcome. So North Korea does that all the time against the international community. So what Secretary Pompeo has said is very basic or principled way of saying that in order to have a successful denuclearization of North Korea, we need to have a common front, like united front against North Korea's tactics of evading and trying to not abide by United Nations Security Council resolution, which demands North Korea to completely denuclearize. But on the other hand, with President Trump trying to radically change the existing alliance structure, what Secretary Pompeo says is not going to be received warmly or positively, because people are going to see there's a little bit of irony here.
Meanwhile, South Korea's top nuclear envoy Lee Do-hoon wrapped up his trip to Washington, where he discussed the follow-up measures of the no-deal Stockholm talks with his U.S. counterparts. What is your analysis of Lee Do-hoon's visit to the U.S.?
Well, I think South Korea would always be on the same page with the United States when it comes to the pace of denuclearization. But I think the timing makes South Korea even more, I would say, I wouldn't really call it desperate, but more anxious to know more about what North Korea thinks and what North Korea would like to do from now on, because South Korea, as we know, has been sidelined in the ongoing denuclearization negotiations. North Korea has made it very clear that South Korea has no role whatsoever in the negotiations. And so I think, it's becoming more important than ever for South Korea to rely on the United States to share more information about what North Korea's strategy is at this point. So, for instance, I think South Korean government is expecting North Korea to come to some sort of agreement with the United States sooner rather than later. For multiple different reasons, for the stability of the region, but also as for the political situation in the domestic situation, I would say. But then I think, with the North Korea being so radical or I would say harsh towards South Korea, I think South Korea feels the need to find out more about what North Korea wants and then prepare South Korea's own approach towards North Korea in terms of engagement policy in the coming year. So I think that's the reason why Lee Do-hoon was in Washington to share the information with the American counterpart.
The taeguk warriors departed for the North Korean capital this afternoon for the World Cup qualifier that's set to be held in Pyongyang tomorrow. But unfortunately, the press nor the cheering squad could accompany them, and it is very unlikely that we will be able to watch the game on TV live. But even so, do you think tomorrow's game could help in thawing inter-Korean relations a little?
Well, I think what's really going on with tomorrow's game is one of the very evident example of how the inter-Korean relations at the bottom right now. If you remember that the last year, there's been a lot of people-to-people exchanges between the two Koreas. Our sports team, South Korean sports teams who go to Pyongyang have friendly games with their North Korean counterparts, and that will be televised live. And then the message behind it was that the time for a confrontation or tension between the two Korea was over. Now everything will be all rosy, and then we'll have a peace at hand. So what North Korea is doing by refusing to televise tomorrow's match, which is a very important match because it's a FIFA World Cup qualifier for the two countries, is essentially sending an implicit message that they're essentially turning over that message that they had last year, which is one of peace and stability and reconciliation. And North Korea is turning upside down that message and saying that that time is over. Now it's back to the time of tension and confrontation. So we should be worried about, even though it's very symbolic, we should be worried about the implications of what happens tomorrow.
What's next for North Korea and the U.S.? Some speculate that the two sides are already in contact to prepare for the next round of working level talks. What are your thoughts? I'm
definitely sure that they are still in touch. Going back to the first point, even though the breakdown of the talks in Stockholm was quite dramatic, especially because North Korean representatives, before going to Stockholm, they had a layover in Beijing, and to the press they showed their hopeful, optimistic expectation of the agreement was within reach between the two countries. So the dramatic statement that the North Korean side gave after the collapse of the talks was quite dramatic. But despite this perception that things are not going well, we have to understand that the two sides are engaged in a very intense discussion, clearly. It's very interesting that both sides have refused to withdraw from the talks completely, especially North Korea. North Korea asked the United States, after complaining about the lack of enthusiasm or seriousness on the American side, they stated again that they will wait until the end of the year for the United States to come back with a better offer. So essentially, this is a tug of war, as you said, that they're trying to really come up with the maximum concession from the other side. So I would expect the United States and North Korea to get together again before the end of the year. And this time, I think because they're under the clock, so to speak, they might come up with a more interesting outcome.
We only have about 1 minute left, so very quickly. Up until now, Pyongyang and Washington tried to resolve the nuclear issue in a top-down manner, meaning the leaders met for summit talks to make decisions. But with the collapse of the bottom-up talks in Stockholm, some are raising the need to go back to the top-down manner talks. What's your take?
So we know now that, I mean, despite all this speculation that, you know, it wasn't really about the content of the talks, but more of an approach that was wrong, that was leading to all this like breakdown of the talks. That talk is wrong, I mean, again, because we thought that it was the format that was giving so much trouble to both sides. Clearly not. We tried the top-down approach, we tried the bottom-up approach, as we see right now. What really matters right now is I mean, essentially that what really matters here is that the realization that both the United States and North Korea are engaged in some sort of a zero-sum game, meaning that unless one side makes a major concession, it takes a step back, and then it makes a major concession to the other side. For instance, the United States might give up its insistence on a CVID, or complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantling of North Korea's nuclear program, or North Korea, for instance, give up its nuclear pretension of becoming a nuclear state completely. There will be no progress whatsoever. So it's again about this zero-sum kind of a gridlock they're engaged. I mean, you know, they are kind of like engaged in right now. Until that's resolved, we are not going to see any meaningful progress in the talk. So, and then it looks like you know, the more desperate side is going to give up before the other does.
Tough challenges lie ahead. Thank you, Dr. Goh, for your insights tonight.
My pleasure.